Well, that sounds great, but how do I actually implement my design for cultural civility? After this video, you'll be able to understand the process of building and maintaining a culture of civility, and understand the key role of leadership in creation of that culture. So let's look at the process. Several steps here. First is, as a manager, look at or do an assessment of an audit of your culture. So just think about your culture. Again, if you have funds to do a consultant, fine. But as a manager, walk around, sort of see what's happening in your culture. Ask people questions. Observe. You can do a lot through observing your culture of what's really happening. The next thing is go back to that definition or the vision of civility that you did in an earlier video. Vision what it is you want and define that clearly. The next step is look at, is there a gap? Look at the culture you have and the culture and the vision of civility that you want within that culture. What are the gaps? Get that analysis down and define where you need to be. Out of that, you can develop a vision that's consistent with your norms, one of civility, and again, eliminate the gaps. So the whole idea is to look at where I'm at, where I'd like to be, look at those gaps, and then develop the vision that's consistent with where you want to be, that vision you have. Then communicate it all. I've said this before in other areas, but you'd be surprised how many times people develop visions and don't communicate it to everybody. It's got to be a top-down approach. The last thing is integrate the vision and norms into your policies and procedures. This is what we call sort of going from the vision to where the rubber meets the road, as you will. It's got to be part of the daily life of your organization. So how do I operationalize this and make it part of reality? Well, it starts with that vision statement. Do you have the clear vision? Has it been communicated? And the one thing I will say about vision statements, you want to try to involve others as well. Don't make this a vision that you have as a manager of your team or organization. Make it a shared vision. People who share the vision will perform much better. But if I hand you my vision, it's a lot different. I once worked in an organization where we had a vision statement on the wall that some executives had developed with probably a consultant somewhere. And it sounded really nice and there was nothing disagreeable, but it wasn't our vision. Make it a vision in our words that people can buy into. The same with the norms. Establish norms based on the team. Ask people, have their involvement commitment. I once worked with a group that had some issues around norms and behaviors, and we established a norm statement and they put on their bulletin board, and it was sort of like their Bill of Rights, if you will, how they wanted to treat each other. And they held each other accountable because it was theirs. It wasn't a manager telling them how they should behave. This was them telling each other how they expect to behave. So involve your people in this process. Ongoing communication via a real open door policy. I've seen too many organizations that have on their policy manual, we have an open door policy, come see any manager anytime, when in reality that wasn't the truth, that people didn't feel that they were welcome. Make sure people feel comfortable. Now, I would encourage anybody to start with your personal manager. I wouldn't go to the CEO right off the bat. But if someone comes in, listen to them. Recognition is another thing to look at. Make sure you recognize people. If you want to dive it deeper into the organization, make sure people feel recognized and recognized for the right things and not the wrong things. So positive behaviors, civil culture, those are things I want recognition for. Foster social connections. There's a wonderful book by Gallup that talks about one of the key things that it engages people and keeps them feeling good about their culture is when there's social connections. Maybe it's you have potlucks, things that bring people together, get to know each other. People want to work where they feel connected to others. They had a phrase that with Gallup in one of their books called a best friend at work. People felt if they had friends at work and there was a connection, that was a good strategy for engagement. And we see it more and more nowadays when people get more and more of their needs met from the workplace. It's a lot different than in years past. It's really about we want more from work than just work. Show a genuine interest in employee well-being. Care about your people. I don't mean to the point where you know everything about their lives, but know a little about them. Make sure they know that you care about them beyond an employee, but you care about them as a person. That goes a long way to building a civil culture. And voice. This is a term that we use in HR and in the performance world. Make sure people have a voice. Make sure they can be heard. That when there's concerns, that this is a little like the open door policy, but if there's something going on, that I can be heard. I'm part of an organization, and I'm not just a cog in the wheel, as they say. So make sure people feel they have a voice in what goes on in the organization. So here's a little thing for you. Think of a good manager you have had, and think of a poor manager. What were their characteristics? On a piece of paper again, write 2 or 3 of those characteristics down for a poor and a good manager. Chances are you'd agree with Professor Adam Grant here. He found that leader kindness and generosity were predictors of organizational team effectiveness. Most of us, when we're talking about good managers, we're talking about people who treat us well, they communicate well, all those things you think of a good manager. When we think of poor managers, poor communication, unclear expectations, they tend to be things that have negative performance impact and negative cultural impact. So think about as your own managerial style. This is a trend we've talked about. Kindness, generosity, this goes a long way. Being a nice person really helps as a manager. That said, we need leadership accountability. One thing is, as a leader and as a manager, make sure you develop and share your vision and values of the organization with your people. We've talked about this a lot. Buy-in and commitment is huge. And the more we involve people and share the vision and values, the more they get integrated into the system. The other one is emotional intelligence. You've probably heard this phrase, EQ. This is about having empathy and civility as requirements for managers. So many times we look at just the task requirements, but we really want to make sure leaders are held accountable for being empathic and civil with their employees. We've already talked about this type of behavior brings dividends. So demand that your leaders and managers exercise behavior that brings dividends, not costs to the organization. Other things you want to hold leaders accountable for. Civility, as you can see here. He's checking out his civility statement. Modeling the behaviors. You got to walk the talk, and we'll talk more about that in subsequent videos. If I'm not modeling the behavior, how could I possibly expect my people to do it? There's an old phrase, do as I say, not as I do. That doesn't carry a lot of credibility for managers. And as a manager, you want to make sure you're credible. Next, reinforcing desired behaviors. We talked about this a little bit, but make sure that you continually look at the behaviors of civility that I want in my organization, and people know that that's what they're going to get reinforced for. And it's easy just to ignore good behavior and focus only on bad behavior. Make sure that people are performing well. Sort of like the good students don't get recognized as much as the bad students because you have to deal with the behavior problems. Coaching on positive behaviors. So many times we'll coach on the negatives and tell them what not to do, but we want to coach on positive behaviors. Give them alternative behaviors to do if they're not doing the right things. These are the types of things you want to hold leaders accountable for. And also, build it into the performance objectives. So when I'm doing objectives with my people, my managers, I always built in the people development. How good at they are developing people. If we think a civil culture has growth and opportunity, make sure that that's part of the job that the manager gets rewarded for. Personal behaviors as well as results. I've known many managers who had great results and the personal behaviors were not so good, but it didn't impact their review. You can't be an A player if you don't have the personal behaviors that go along with that. To be a star in the organization, you got to have the behaviors and the results. And along that line, focus on the how and why of behaviors. It's one thing to have good performance behaviors and that produce good results, but you want to know the how. How did they get those results? Did they get it by beating up their employees with verbal abuse or treating customers poorly? It's got to be good behavior and good results. That's the key, and that's what we want to hold leaders accountable for when managing performance and having a civil, positive culture.